Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Diary of Anne Frank. Yeah, Peter and Anne keep getting closer while she's still struggling with everybody else. She's even getting closer to Margot, but it's really her and Peter that are getting the closest. But let's go ahead and jump back into this. Friday, March the 24th, 1944. Dear Kitty, I often go up to Peter's room after dinner nowadays to breathe in fresh evening air. We can get around to meaningful conversations more quickly in the dark than in the sun tickling your face. It's cozy and snug sitting beside him on a chair and looking outside. The Von Dans and Dussel make the silliest remarks when I disappear up to it into his room. Ans zweite Heimat, they say. Or, is it proper for a gentleman to receive young girls in his room at night with the lights out? Peter has amazing presence of mind in the face of these so-called witticisms. My mother, incidentally, is also bursting with curiosity and simply dying to ask what we talk about. Um, but only she's secretly afraid I'd refuse to answer. Peter says the grown-ups are just jealous because we're young and we shouldn't take their obnoxious comments to heart. Sometimes he comes downstairs to get me, but that's awkward too because, in spite of all his precautions, his face turns bright red and he can hardly get the words out of his mouth. I'm glad I don't blush. It must be extremely unpleasant. Besides, it bothers me that Margot has to sit downstairs all by herself, while I'm upstairs enjoying Peter's company. But what can I do about it? I wouldn't um, mind it if she came, but she'd just be the odd one out, sitting down like a lump on a log. I've had to listen to countless remarks about our sudden friendship. I can't tell you how often the conversation at meals has been about an annex wedding should the war last another 5 years. Do we take any notice of the parental chit chat? Hardly, since it's all so silly. Have my parents forgotten that they were young once? Apparently they have. At any rate, they laugh at us when we're serious, and they're serious when we're joking. I don't know what's going to happen next, or whether we'll run out of things to say, but if it goes on like this, we'll eventually be able to be together without talking. If only his parents would stop acting so strangely. It's probably because they don't like seeing me so often. Peter and I certainly never tell them what we talk about. Imagine if they knew we were discussing such intimate things. I'd like to ask Peter whether he knows what girls look like down there. I don't think boys are as complicated as girls. You can easily see what boys look like in photographs or pictures of male nudes, but with women it's different. In women, the genitals, or whatever they're called, are suddenly hidden, or whatever they're called, are hidden between their legs. Peter has probably never seen a girl up close. To tell you the truth, neither have I. Boys are a lot easier. How on earth would I go about describing a girl's parts? I can tell from what he said that he doesn't know exactly how it fits together. He was talking about the Mittelmund, but that's on the inside where you can see it. Everything's pretty well arranged for us women. Until I was 11 or 12, I didn't realize there was a second set of labia on the inside, since you couldn't see them. What's even funnier is that I thought urine came out of the clitoris. I asked Mother one time and what the little lump was, and she said she didn't know. She can really play dumb when she wants to. But to get back to the subject, how on earth can you explain what it looks like without any models? Shall I try anyway? Okay, here goes. When you're standing up, all you can see from the front is hair. Between your legs are two soft, cushiony things, also covered with hair, which press together when you're standing, so you can't see what's inside. They separate when you sit down, and they're very red and quite fleshy on the inside. In the upper part, between the outer labia, there's a coat of skin that, on second thought, looks like a kind of blister. That's the clitoris. Then come the inner labia, which are also pressed together in a kind of crease. When they open up, you can see a fleshy little mound, no bigger than the top of my thumb. The upper part has a couple of small holes in it, which is where the urine comes out. The lower part looks as if it were just skin, and yet that's where the vagina is. You can barely find it because the folds of skin hide the opening. The hole's so small I can hardly imagine how a man could get in there, much less how a baby could come out. It's hard enough trying to get your index finger inside. That's all there is, and yet it plays such an important role. Yours, Anne M. Frank. Saturday, March the 25th, 1944. Dearest Kitty, you never realize how much you've changed until after it's happened. I've changed quite dramatically. Everything about me is different. My opinions, ideas, critical outlook. Inwardly, outwardly, nothing's the same. And I might safely add, since it's true, I've changed for the better. I once told you that after years of being adored, it was hard for me to adjust to to the harsh reality of grown-ups and rebukes. But father and mother are largely to blame for my having to put up with that so much. At home, they wanted me to enjoy life, which is fine, but here they shouldn't have encouraged me to agree with them and only shown me their side of the quarrels and gossip. It was a long time before I discovered the score was 50-50. I now know that many blunders have been committed here by young and old alike. Father and mother's biggest mistake in dealing with the Von Dons is that they're never candid and friendly. Admittedly, the friendliness might have been feigned, or might have to be feigned. Above all, I want Father and Margot above all, I want to keep the peace and to neither quarrel or gossip. With Father and Margot, that's not difficult. But it is with Mother, which is why I'm glad she gave me an occasional rap on the knuckles. You can win Mr. Van Daan to your side by agreeing with him, listening quietly, not saying much, And most of all, responding to his teasing and his corny jokes with a joke of your own. Mrs. Von Don can be won over by talking openly to her and admitting when you're wrong. She also frankly admits her faults, of which she has many. I know all too well that she doesn't think as badly of me as she did in the beginning, and that's simply because I'm honest and tell people right to their faces what I think, even when it's not very flattering. I want to be honest. I think it gets you further and also makes you feel better about yourself. Yesterday, Mrs. Von Don was talking about the rice we gave Mr. Kleiman. All we do is give, give, give. But at a certain point, I think that enough is enough. If he'd only take the trouble, Mr. Kleiman could scrounge up his own rice. Why should we give away all of our supplies? We need them just as badly. No, Mrs. Von Don, I replied. I don't agree with you. Mr. Kleiman may very well be able to get hold of a little rice, but he doesn't mean like having to worry about it. Or he doesn't like having to worry about it. It's not our place to criticize the people who are helping us. We should give them whatever they need if we can possibly spare it. One less plate of rice a week won't make that much of a difference. We can always eat beans. Mrs. Von Don didn't see it my way, but she added that even though she disagreed, she was willing to back down and that it was an extremely different matter. Well, I've said enough. Sometimes I know what my place is, and sometimes I have my doubts, but I'll eventually get where I want to be. I know I will. Especially now that I have help, since Peter helps me through many a rough patch and rainy day. I honestly don't know how much he loves me and whether we'll get as far as a kiss. In any case, I don't want to force the issue. I told Father I often go to see Peter, and I asked if he approved, and of course he did. It's much easier now that to tell Peter things I'd normally keep to myself. For example, I told him I want to write later on, and if I can be a writer, to write in addition to my work. I don't have much in the way of money or worldly possessions. I'm not beautiful, intelligent, or clever, but I'm happy, and I intend to stay that way. I was born happy. I love people. I have a trusting nature, and I'd like everyone else to be happy too. Your devoted friend, Anne M. Frank. An empty day, though clear and bright, is just as dark as any night. I wrote this a few weeks ago, and it no longer holds true, but I included it because my poems are so few and far between. Monday, March the 27th, 1944. My dearest Kitty, at least one long chapter in our lives in hiding should be about politics, but I've been avoiding the subject since it interests me so little. Today, however, I'll devote an entire letter to politics. Of course, there are many different opinions on this topic, and it's not surprising to hear it frequently discussed in times of war. But arguing so much about politics is just plain stupid. Let them laugh, swear, make bets, grumble, and do whatever they want as long as they stew in their own juice. But don't let them argue, since that only makes things worse. The people who come from outside bring us a lot of news that later proves to be untrue. However, up to now, our radio has never lied. Jan, Miep, Mr. Kleiman, Bepp, and Mr. Kugler go up and down in their political moods, though Jan least of all. Here in the annex, the mood never varies. The endless debates over the invasion, air raids, speeches, etc., are accompanied by countless exclamations such as "Impossible! Gottes Willen!" If they're just getting started now, how long is it going to last? It's going splendidly great. Optimists and pessimists, not to mention realists, air their opinions with unflagging energy, and as with everything else, they're all certain that they have a monopoly on the truth. It annoys a certain lady that her spouse in such supreme faith in the British, and a certain husband attacks his wife because of her teasing and disparaging remarks about his beloved nation. And so it goes from early in the morning to late at night. The funny part is that they never get tired of it. I've discovered a trick, and the effect is overwhelming. Just like pricking someone with a pin and watching them jump. Here's how it works. I start talking about politics. All it takes is a single question, a word or a sentence, and before you know it, the entire family is involved. As if the German Wehrmacht news and the English BBC weren't enough, they've now added special air raid announcements. In a word, splendid. But the other side of the coin is that the British Air Force is operating around the clock, not unlike the German propaganda machine, which is cranking out lies 24 hours a day. So the radio is switched on every morning at 8, if not earlier, and is listened to every hour until 9, 10, or even 11 at night. This is the best evidence yet that the adults have infinite patience, but also that their brains have turned to mush. Some of them, since I wouldn't want to insult anyone. One broadcast, 2 at the most, should be enough to last the entire day. But no, those old nincompoops. Never mind, I've already said it all. Music while you work. The Dutch broadcast from England. Frank Phillips or Queen Wilhelmina. They each get a turn and find a willing listener. If the adults aren't eating or sleeping, they're clustered around the radio talking about eating, sleeping, and politics. Whew! It's getting to be a bore, and it's all I can do to keep from turning into a dreary old crone myself. Though with all the old folks around me, that might not be such a bad idea. Here's a shining example, a speech made by our beloved Winston Churchill. 9 o'clock Sunday evening. The teapot under its cozy is on the table, and the guests enter the room. Dussel sits on the left of the radio, Mrs. Van Daan in the front of it, and Peter to the side. Mother is next to Mr. Van Daan and Mrs. Van Daan behind them. Margot and I are sitting in the last row, and Pim is at the table. I realize this isn't a very clear description of our seating arrangements, but it doesn't matter. The men smoke. Peter's eyes close from the strain of listening. Mama is dressed in her long, dark negligee. Mrs. Van Daan is trembling because of the planes which take no notice of the speech, but fly blithely on toward Essen. Father is slurping his tea, and Margot and I are united in a sisterly way by the sleeping Malshi, who has taken possession of both our knees. Margot's hair is in curlers, and my nightgown is too small, too tight, and too short. It all looks so intimate, cozy, and peaceful, and for once it really is. Yet I await the end of the speech with dread. They're impatient, straining at the leash to start another argument. Psst, psst, like a cat luring a mouse from its hole, they goad each other into quarrels and dissent. Yours, Anne. We'll go ahead and end this episode there. Quick look back, though, as they did use some German I wasn't too full up on. Let's see. Yeah, when they tease Anne for keeping the going up to Peter's room and call his room Ans Zweit Heimat. It says it means Anne's second home. And when she's describing genitalia in detail, she says Peter had been talking about the Muttermund, which it says means cervix. And they talk about the countless exclamations and say, "Impossible! Gottes Willen!" which means, "Oh, for heaven's sake!" they say is what it translates into, so. But yeah. It's only 3 entries, but they were long ones, so that's perfectly fine. Yeah. So, we get a number of different topics. First entry specifically is talking about genitalia. And yeah, she describes her own genitalia in detail because she herself is learning. As she said, she didn't realize there was a second set of labia. So yeah. And honestly, it's in a scientific way. So she's describing things like the clitoris, the labia, just basic descriptions of the vagina and the fact that it's hard to see. While if you look at nude picture in nude pictures, but if you look at nude pictures or nude art of guys, it's clear up front. So yeah, that's what she's referring to. So yeah, and in the next entry, she talks about how she's changed. She's realized individually as a person, her attitude. She wouldn't know it until it happens. She said about how much she's changed, and that's what she's talking about. So I've changed personally as an individual, as a person. And of course, the third entry was a diatribe on politics, because especially in times of war, everything like that, politics plays a huge role. It just does, whether you like it or not. That's just how life goes. So yeah. Oh, sorry for the yawning there. Getting a bit wore out. Well, I've been yawning all day anyway, despite even earlier in the day, so I don't know. But yeah. A wide variety of subjects she touches in just these 3 journal entries. But they're deep dives into those entries. Like I said, first one talking about genitalia and how they kind of tease her about naughty things when she's going up to Peter's room so much now with the lights off. But as she says, we're just sitting there in front of the window. While they're together, so. Oh. And second entry, like I said, she talks about how much she's changed and how much she recognizes how the others in the annex behave and how they interact. And yeah, third one, her bit of a diatribe on politics. But yeah. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and end this episode. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.